Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Montgomery County Council. Today, we're here to conduct interviews for the applicants for the Commission on Redistricting. I want to begin today with a very sad note to let everyone know that Jerry Samet has passed away. Mr. Samet was the longtime chair of the East County Citizens Advisory Board and a very prominent leader countywide, and particularly in East County. He was the founder and CEO of Youth Leaders International, later Leaders International, very active in the Democratic Party and a co-founder of the District 14 Democratic Club, and just an outstanding individual. More information is to come, as well as a council statement. We ask everyone to keep his family and his countless friends in your thoughts and prayers. We'll miss him greatly, and please join me in a moment of silence for Jerry Samet. Thank you. Okay, good morning, candidates. Thank you for applying for this very important position. I'll ask you all a series of 4 questions, and then my colleagues may have additional questions. Several of us have time constraints, so we'd ask you to keep your comments relatively brief, but we're very eager that you're here, and we're very grateful that you are willing to apply for this very important role on the Commission on Redistricting. The first panel is Dean Ahmad, Faith Blackburn, John Brewer, Jacqueline Coolidge, and Mariana Cordier. Welcome, everyone. Ask the first. Can everyone hear me? All right? Okay, fine. So you can please answer in order. Mr. Ahmad, you're first. Why do you want to be a member of the Redistricting Commission? Oh, and sorry, I will note that all the panelists have been given all the questions in advance, so I don't believe there's a need for me to rotate the questions among them since they've all seen the questions. Mr. Ahmad, good to see you. Why do you want to be a member of the Redistricting Commission?
Well, obviously, redistricting, the question of districting is a very important element in the maintenance of our democracy. And I want to, for a couple of reasons. I have an interest in these kind of questions. I believe that I could bring an impartial attitude to it. I can put in the work. And as a representative of one of the new parties in Maryland, I believe it's an opportunity to make sure that all the people in the county's concerns are addressed.
Thank you. Ms. Blackburn.
Good morning, council members, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I believe my interest in wanting to be a member of the Redistricting Commission comes from my complete understanding of civic and political importance engagement in our community. My work is NAACP as a life member and here in Montgomery County. Can you see me? I have a message saying that you stopped my video.
Oh, we can see you.
Okay, sorry about that. Makes me aware of the importance of civic responsibility and the importance of drawing lines that represent our communities and the fair representation on the standard of one person, one vote is very important. And as Montgomery County becomes a majority-minority county, I believe representation to that fact is keenly important in how we operate in our communities and how residents are represented in Montgomery County.
Can I ask all the panelists to turn your panels on and your videos on and leave them on so we can see you and your responses, please? Terrific. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Blackburn. Mr. Brewer.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. My interest in serving the panel is very much like my fellow candidates. I have my family and I have a history of public service and concern for these issues. My parents were very involved in the community, and I've carried on that tradition. I have two small children, very involved in the education here in Montgomery County and in their education. I serve on as a NAACP parent representative here in Montgomery County Schools. I've also done some work with the agricultural community here. I believe my work with as a chief data officer at the Department of Agriculture and working with data and analytics would be very useful in this effort to draw lines and to work with analytics and other data as we carry out this work of redrawing district lines, and certainly have a long history and know the value of voting and the importance of that issue to our community as a whole, and particularly the Black and Brown community of Montgomery County. So I think all of those elements would make me a very valuable member of this commission.
Thank you. Mr. Coolidge. Ms. Coolidge, I'm sorry. Going too fast here. Beg your pardon.
Can you hear me?
You can.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Jackie Coolidge. Very nice to be invited here with this group. I am interested in being part of the commission because I do think that the whole redistricting process is really fundamental to the good functioning of a representative democracy. I feel very strongly, in addition to the core principles of one person, one vote, that a democratic system needs to be based on voters being able to choose their representatives. And if voters have the sense that it has been the politicians who have been choosing their voters, that can be very corrosive. So I'm delighted that there is now a commission for this. I would be interested in being part of it. I think it's quite fascinating. I'm so proud of Montgomery County being so diverse and all the different neighborhoods. So I imagine sometimes there may be a temptation to take a rather superficial view of the kinds of communities that we have here in Montgomery County. I would be delighted to dive into hearings and to be able to hear from many, many different communities about their own sense of community. There's so much more diversity than shows up just in census tract data about race or ethnicity or anything. So I would really be interested in hearing from many different communities about their sense of affiliation, who they relate to, where they agree on priorities, and how we can come up with a map that really reflects that richness here in Montgomery County. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Coolidge. Ms. Cordier.
Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this process. And I'm very impressed with my colleagues on the panel interviewing. I am very interested in participating in the Redistricting Commission and to be on it because I've lived all my life here in Montgomery County. I'm an immigrant from Argentina. I have worked here through my professional career, and through my work have had the opportunity to have represented many people, not only from the Hispanic community, but from all walks of life, and seen and heard their personal stories and interactions with government, with private sector, with whatever comes into their lives, and how it is so impactful impactful. And so I think it's super important, and I agree with everyone who has spoken before me that their participation in the process is important. The feel counted and included. I think that the fact that this commission has been created, the transparency that is going to be utilized to draw these boundaries and to take into consideration and balance, you know, the communities of interest and the such. I just hope that my participation, if I should be honored to be included, will bring my perspective from an immigrant, from a Hispanic woman, from my contact with all of my clients who've come from all over the world that are living here. I mean, I remember when Montgomery County was less diverse, and now we are so rich in diversity that it's an exciting time. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you. Okay. Question number 2. The commission will meet from February to November. The commission will determine its schedule once it convenes, but in the past, there have been times when meetings were held on a weekly basis. Will you be able to make the time commitment the commission requires? Mr. Ahmad.
Yes, my schedule has some flexibility provided there's enough advance notice. I don't see why there shouldn't be in order to work carve out the time to make sure that I'm available for every meeting.
Thank you so much. Ms. Blackburn.
Yes, I am available for meeting with the commission at the appointed times.
Okay. Mr. Brewer.
Yes, sir, I am available.
Ms. Coolidge. Big thumbs up. Okay, I think you're muted. And you take that to be a yes? Were you trying to unmute?
Yes, I'm retired, and I juggle a certain amount of consulting work with a lot of volunteer work, and I would prioritize this.
Terrific. Thank you. And Ms. Cordier.
Yes, I'm a small business owner, so I'm the boss. I can make the time.
That's good to hear. Okay. Question number 3. The Racial Equity and Social Justice Bill became effective on March 2nd, 2020, and several months later, the council voted on a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis. What role should the commission take to address racial equity and social justice in boundary decisions? Mr. Ahmad.
Well, obviously, making sure that everybody's vote is going to count, and not only to guarantee the rights of every individual, but also to guarantee that every community is properly represented, should be one of, if not the primary, at least one of the primary objectives of the commission. So I think that being able to satisfy these requirements that are mentioned in the legislation is something that we can address, should address, and I'm 100% committed to that.
Thank you. Ms. Blackburn.
Yes, as Montgomery County becomes, or is a majority minority county, given that fact, the diversity of the county and of its residents is even more important on how we are represented. So I believe the role of the commission is to be one of transparency and inclusiveness, and also setting the standard of being represented by one person, one vote. As the commission considers how we draw the lines, it should be fair and equitable in the representation of the diversity of the communities that we live in. And I think that with as we provide opportunities for more of our residents to participate in the political process, I think the Redistricting Commission is integral in planning and being part of, or allowing folks to be part of, the democratic process.
Thank you. Mr. Brewer.
Yes, sir. I think this is really where my background in data and analytics will be of value to the commission. I think that this is where we will really have a chance to look at the data, look at how, where the social and economic elements of the county are, how we can make sure that the lines are drawn to make sure that areas of the county where there has been economic growth and economic development are not drawn in one area where social and economic challenges are drawn in another. So I think bringing in the analytics and data and making sure that that's included as we look at these issues is something where I really think would be of value to incorporate in our issues and as we look at this issue.
Thank you. Ms. Coolidge.
Yes, I really think that this has to be a very participatory process, very open. I think we need to pay attention to outreach and engagement with the communities. It wasn't that long after, there was discussion about Montgomery County being a majority-minority county, and I was very proud of that. But when there was discussion about just a study of changing the school district boundaries, I was astounded at a lot of the complaints that immediately arose about that. And I still have a hard time understanding, how people can, be opposed to a study. But that tells me that we really do need to think about a whole strategy of outreach and engagement so that people really feel that they're part of the process and that their voices can be heard as we go through with this exercise.
Thank you. And Ms. Cordier.
Thank you. I think that the Commission's approach has to be one that is holistic and taking into consideration and inviting the stakeholders of the communities to participate, promoting confidence in what ultimately will be the report of the Commission and transparency in the process. For their participation is crucial because I think that helps to balance the burden of the community's interest and minimize possible unfortunate outcomes in drawing the boundaries and coming with them. So we need to balance it and do it in a way where we're protecting and making sure that racial equality is protected and is in line and balanced with the Voter Rights Act that we have to be compliant with. I believe that confidence from the community will come with their involvement in our transparency in doing this process. And the more participation and inclusion that we have, I think the quicker we'll be to identify issues and problems and find solutions to work around them and do it in such a way that this is for the benefit of the voters and not of the politicians, that this is really where your vote will count. And so this is a historic opportunity, and I think that we can do a good job. Everyone is super qualified. Everyone brings a different perspective. And if we follow in that role, as Montgomery County has shown to be a leader in doing, I think the community's trust and support for the redistricting will help facilitate this process to its conclusion.
Thank you. Okay, question number 4. It's a two-part question. Are you planning to run in the upcoming 2022 election, or are there any other potential conflict of interest of which we should be aware? Mr. Ahmad.
I am not planning to run in 2022, and I am not aware of any potential conflicts of interest.
Thank you. Ms. Blackburn.
No, do not plan to run, and no conflicts of interest.
Thank you. Mr. Brewer.
I will not run, nor will I accept any opportunity to run in 2022, and I have no conflicts that I'm aware of.
The Sherman-esque answer. Okay, Ms. Coolidge.
Yeah, I have no plans to run for anything, no conflicts that I'm aware of. Thank you.
And Ms. Cordier.
Yeah, I'm not going to run for any office, and I don't believe I have any conflicts.
Okay, thank you all for your answers. Councilmember Glass has a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us and for expressing your interest. this decennial process of redistricting is really important to ensure equal and fair representation right here in our own local representative democracy. And it's been encouraging to me that I believe 108 individuals applied to be on this commission and participate in this democratic process. So that's awesome. And so thank you for your interest. During this November election, residents of Montgomery County had a very robust conversation about the makeup of the county council. And ultimately, 63% of voters supported question C, believing that we should increase the size of the council from 9 to 11 members by adding 2 districts. And it'll be the task of this redistricting commission to create those 2 new districts in addition to updating the existing 5 districts, all of which will be based on census data. So the question I have for you all and all the other applicants who come before us is, please share with us what the passage of question C means to you and how you will interpret the will of the voters as it guides your work.
Mr. Ahmad.
Well, let me disclose that I favor expanding the size of the council, not because I think we need more council members, but because I thought smaller districts would allow a better representation, more accountability, and lead to better governance in general. Now that that has passed, the next step, as you say, is correctly to make sure that the districts are drawn in a proper way. And I think that, that's obviously the job of this commission. I believe that I have the background in my interest in these questions to be able to contribute positively to that. And frankly, let me say, and I don't know if this is part of the commission's mandate, but I do wish in the process to bring up the question of the algorithms by which such redistricting is done, in the hopes that some future time the county council may choose to set up a totally algorithmic method that may take out the possibility of conflicts of interest, not necessarily anything malicious, but the internal biases that we all have from playing a role in the redistricting in the future, at least, if not this time around. So I do look forward to frank discussions with the other members of the commission in order to see what is the best way to deal with these problems that's totally as objective and as fair to everybody as possible.
Okay, Ms. Blackburn.
Yes, I think that this vote was important because it recognized the growth of the county and the need for more intimate representation, more one-on-one being available for residents to council members. I remember in one of my meeting attending with the Democratic County Party, the discussion of how members feel or residents feel not being able to reach out to their representative. And I think that if given we have an increase in the number with maybe smaller representation or smaller county districts, that provides more access to residents, to council members to voice their concerns or thoughts on what should be happening here in the county. And so I think that's a good opportunity for council members and community residents to have more input in how their government or in how the county is shaped.
Mr. Brewer.
Thank you. Let me associate myself with a couple of things Mr. Ahmad said, because I think they're very important and I totally agree with them. Number one, I also supported the expansion of the county council. I thought it was important. I thought it did demonstrate the energy and growth of the county, and I think those are both good things. I think that shows that there is a need to have more council members, because you do need that smaller number of population that each council member represents. I think that is important. The ratio to council member to population they represent, I think that's very important. So I did support it as well. The second thing, I think, and perhaps there is another time for this, but the other point he brought up about data and analytic bias, I think that is something that we certainly need to watch for as the redistricting process moves more and more to data and analytics. This is something that, again, I certainly am aware of in my work at agriculture in this space, that is something that you really have to watch against, and something that I would certainly pay attention to as we went through this process, if I was allowed to be a part of. But back to your original question, I think that the expansion of the council was important. I think it was a good thing, and that, again, that it symbolized the health of the county, and something that I think we, as the people that will be responsible for drawing the lines, that we draw them in a sense that encourages transparency and encourages a recognition of the diversity of the county, and make sure that those lines are drawn to recognize those issues.
Thank you. Ms. Coolidge.
Yes, I definitely supported Proposition C, and I agree it was important to reflect the growth in the county. I appreciate the arguments in favor of, heavy attention to the data and to the beneficial use of algorithms, but I also have a couple of things that I think we should keep in mind. First of all, some of the really profound challenges that were faced during this census this time around, both the delays and the problems with COVID, but in addition, some of the, shall we say, meddling from the administration that may have led to some people being hesitant to cooperate with the census. There have been a number of questions, allegations of problems, not necessarily here in Montgomery County, but in general around the country, of hasty census work, which makes me want to take some effort to verify the quality of the data that we'll be getting from the census, and attentive to the possibility that there may have been some undercounts in certain neighborhoods, and try to keep that in mind as we are going about the business of working with the data to draw the boundaries. We know we have to have approximately equal population in each one. And then there's many of the other criteria that people talk about in drawing districts are sometimes at tension with each other. You might want to use an algorithm to come up with compact districts, but on the other hand, that could possibly lead to lines being drawn sort of, right through a neighborhood, for example. And I think that it's likely that perhaps a higher priority criteria for drawing boundaries should be to try to maintain communities and neighborhoods as much as possible, and to avoid a situation where you are splitting or cracking a neighborhood or a community, if you can avoid that. Because I do think that people feel, voters and citizens and residents feel better if they feel that they're part of a community, the community has a representative, and they can feel confident that that their sense of community is being respected. So again, I would definitely be making full use of all the data tools that we have available, but also being very attentive and listening to the input that we're getting from different neighborhoods and communities. Thanks.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. Can you just say in a sentence how a county verifies a census count?
I don't know. I'm not an expert in that, but I definitely would be making inquiries around different neighborhoods and using, let's say, community leaders to try to verify or to probe whether households really were participating in the census fully one way or the other. So I would at least, make some outreach efforts going through various community organizations and community leaders to try to probe about that.
Thank you. Ms. Cordier.
Thank you. So I supported Proposition C, and I thought, or the basis for my support was the need for the representation of the community to be more specific. So with more council members, that would be a need that would be met. The county's very large. Up county is very different from down county, and their needs vary quite a few degrees. And taking into consideration the community's needs, the human factor, the data factor, the factor of finance, services, delivery of services, all of that, I think, is something that the commission is going to have to build a toolkit, if you will, to address all those different factors and weigh the pros and the cons, and definitely avoid as much as possible splitting neighborhoods. I think that is one of the worst things that can happen, because typically neighborhoods, I'm the president of an HOA, neighborhoods have a cohesive need in certain things and certain factors. Neighborhoods group together. It's not just one neighborhood, but the surrounding and others. And the impacts of traffic, the impact of, like I said, services. There's so much involved in this that it almost feels like an insurmountable task. But if we take it in consideration with our community and our stakeholders and our leaders and the data points, and we put it all together and take the time to really, fret through everything, I believe that we will be able to draw the boundaries in such a way that we will have districts that will offer their constituents better representation, better access to the representatives. And this process can also encourage and teach the community that they have a right to access their politicians and representatives, because a little bit of community education, it will be needed and will fall on all of us, the leaders in the communities, to share this information so that when we do draw these boundaries, every consideration that needs to be taken and evaluated can be done and delivered. And so that's why I supported Proposition C.
Well, I don't have any other questions. I noticed the time, but I appreciate the thoughtfulness for which you responded to the open-ended question, and for those of you who provided potential updates to updating the way that we do the census or do the redistricting in 10 years' time, we can engage in that conversation. But thank you again all for wanting to be involved in this process.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Rice has a question.
Well, thank you very much. And Ms. Cordier, you actually picked up and started where I wanted to begin. So look, the Up County is one of the three representatives, district representatives of the Up County. Both Councilmember Navarro and Councilmember Friedson also represent the Up County. So I always thought during this discussion about Up County representation that it was important to actually recognize that. But when we look at Germantown, over 100,000 residents, we'll see with the census results as to where we are in terms of numbers. When we look at Clarksburg, one of the fastest growing regions in the county, certainly there's a lot happening in our Up County region. And so from that perspective, I'm curious as to what you think in terms of the current boundary lines and where they're drawn, if you have familiarity with them, and where you think there's opportunity for us to make a more equitable decision when it comes to how that representation should be spread across the entire county. So I'll turn that over back to you, Mr. President, to call on folks.
Thank you. I'll rotate since you didn't see these questions coming. Ms. Blackburn, you're first.
Thank you. I see as the growth of Up County, as you've mentioned, Councilman Rice, there's an opportunity to reevaluate some of how the lines are drawn, and I believe that with new activities and economic booms that are coming through Up County, it gives us more. It will give us an opportunity to kind of debunk the equity between Up County and Down County in terms of representation. I think that there is an opportunity there for growth and more expansion there, while taking into consideration the historic perspective of what's been done and how the lines have been previously drawn. In terms of, I'm kind of shifting. I wanted to talk about the census. As someone who recently worked with the 2020 census, I believe that our on-the-ground outreach and work with community leaders to make sure that we had a fair and quality census count, 2020 census count. And we worked with many of you in your community to ensure that we had a complete count. So I believe in knowing the importance and what the census means in terms of representation, in terms of bringing more resources into the communities. I believe that this will be an opportunity for us to look and reevaluate how the growth of Montgomery County in total, and particularly in Up County and Down County, well, across the county, there have been growth and more diversity. And so I believe that this provides an opportunity, the redistricting committee provides an opportunity to reevaluate where the potential growth will happen in the next 10, 20 years, and how we are represent and provide a fair opportunity for residents to be part of the process and to be included in the democratic process.
Thank you. Mr. Brewer.
Thank you. So I probably would answer it with elements of some of the answers that we've already given to some of the earlier questions. I'm not completely familiar with how the lines are drawn in the Up County right now, but I'll go back to a lot of things I've said earlier. I'm a data guy, so I would probably couple my understanding and commitment to incorporating data in what I would bring to this commission with things that my colleagues and I have talked about, or my fellow candidates and I have talked about earlier today. That is coupling data with transparency, equality, making sure that we try and make sure that the social economic issues are combined with issues of growth, and make sure the lines are drawn in order to led by data, are drawn in a manner in which all those elements are taken into account. That's how I think we should approach it.
Thank you. Ms. Coolidge.
Yes, looking at the map, which I just pulled up, I know personally I'm in District 1. I enjoy having Councilmember Friedson, and before him, Roger Berliner, with no complaints. I, perfectly happy with the map. If you were to ask me about myself, my household, my neighborhood, but I've certainly heard plenty of voices, and it certainly came out during the debates coming up on the election about proposals C and D, that there are people in other parts of the county who feel frustrated. So obviously we have some listening to do. But I will say, though, that I'd say probably in my mind, one of the biggest challenges for the county is the problem of the growing disparities in income and all kinds of other related socioeconomic outcomes, education, and so on, and trying to grapple with that and trying to make sure that our limited resources that are available within the county are focused where they are most needed, and not necessarily where the squeakiest wheels are. Yes, we have our representation, and as I've said, I think it's important to make sure that communities feel represented. But at the end of the day, I'm hopeful that County Council will be able to direct its attention to communities that have been underserved and that are more in need of scarce resources. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Cordier.
Thank you. Well, I have a friend who lives in Up County, very near and dear to my heart. And so I'm not in Germantown, but I am familiar with at least that community and some of their issues they've raised. And I think that this is an opportunity to take advantage of, to adjust any inequalities that may inadvertently occurred or advertently. I'm not going to visit the past. I'd rather move for the future. So I think that this is an opportunity to make sure that we draw these lines in a way that the issues in all of the communities in Montgomery County are addressed, but also taking into consideration, for instance, Up County has a trailer park. None of the other areas in the county can say that, though they may have low-income housing or they may have poverty. There is poverty in Montgomery County. So there's a lot of services, needs, and issues that we need to look at and consider the human factor as well as the data factor, marry the two together. And I am one of those folks who totally believes in a holistic approach. It's going to take everything in the pot to then mix it together and balance so that we have the best that we can do with what we have and giving every voter in this county representation that is fair and equal.
Thank you. Okay, we have at least 4 council members who would like to ask a question, so I ask my colleagues to ask quick questions and for the panelists to give quick answers. Councilmember Jawando is next, and we'll begin the answers with Mr. Brewer. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will abide by the quick turnaround protocol. And great to see everybody. Thank you. You're obviously very smart because none of you want to run for office, so I know we have a smart group here. Thank you for your willingness to serve. Just driving a little deeper, worked a lot in my career on fair representation and as a civil rights lawyer, and a couple things you all said are very important, and I'm very happy to hear, but I want to drive just one point and see what you think about it. So communities of interest is a term that's used often in redistricting at every level. It's a principle to try to put people who are from similar communities together so that they, they might not think exactly the same on every issue, but they're probably going to have some agreement on what the issues are, right, and what they're dealing with. How important do you think that is? And being a big county that we are, 500 square miles, 1.1 million plus people, rural, urban, suburban, everything in between. How important do you think that idea of making districts that kind of congregate people in communities of interest, whatever you think those are, is that an important principle to you? And if so, can you explain why or why not?
Mr. Brewer.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. Yes, sir, I do think that is important. I think that it leads to something that we've been talking about earlier. It leads to greater participation among voters. I think if they feel that there's that shared interest. So I think it leads to greater participation. I think it leads to greater belief in the system. So drawing lines in that way, I think overall just leads to greater participation and greater belief in the system. And I think those are very important elements to have in a democracy.
Terrific. Ms. Coolidge.
Yes, I would tend to put a relatively high priority on communities of interest over, let's say, something like compactness, which a lot of people have focused on when it comes to this kind of exercise. But it can be very tricky. So the data that you might get out of the census with regard to racial or ethnic configurations may not do justice to the richness of the diversity, especially of what we have here in Montgomery County. We don't have any monolithic blocks. There is tremendous diversity within all of the different groups that are mentioned on the census. We obviously would want to be attentive to things like income and education and so on. But I think most important is listening and going out and having opportunities to have discussions in many different neighborhoods and hearing how people define their own communities and being attentive to that. And then using that kind of information to do what Mr. Brewer was just talking about, is making sure that we are respecting people's feelings about their community and their desire for a common representation within a body like County Council. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Cordier.
Thank you. I think community of interest should be kept intact as much as possible, with consideration with compliance of the Federal Voters' Rights Act, but also to make sure there is no inadvertent burden or harm done to any community that we're trying to, draw the lines with, because I think it's not just about race, it's not just about culture, it's a little bit more complicated. But as much as we can keep those in communities intact, communities of interest, I think, is super important, because with those communities, a lot of their interests, issues, services, and needs are very similar, and it will make it more effective for government, for the representatives, to make sure to deliver to the community those needs and address them, and the funding, because then all of this also goes into the considerations for funding and the budget and all of that. So I think as much as possible, without violating the Federal Voters' Rights Act — I'm a lawyer too, so I'm always worried about that — but balancing it, and to make sure that we do the best we can for the people of Montgomery County.
Thank you. Mr. Rahman.
Yes, I believe very strongly that we should not be dividing up communities of interest, but I don't think that that's going to be a problem necessarily. There are easy ways to deal with that. One of the things that's not been mentioned is that many of these communities are self-defining. For example, I live in East Bethesda. Proud member of the East Bethesda Citizens Association, was president of it at one time. Any redistricting that would try to cut the East Bethesda neighborhood in half would be senseless. But that's something that could be taken into account, and even by algorithms. I think we could count on Mr. Brewster to help us with that. It's not an impossible problem, and I think it's very important. Since I didn't get a chance to answer the previous question, it's especially important when we're talking about changing 5 districts to 7, and we have these very large, in the sense of widespread districts, mostly representing Upper Montgomery County. Everyone knows the differences between the Upper and the Lower County. One of the reasons the Montgomery County Fair is so great is because we have such a diversity as represented in lifestyles that go into that. So I think that this is something that must be addressed, and that yes, communities should not be split up, and that's one of the factors that should be looked at.
I beg your pardon. Did I forget to go back to you on the previous question?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay. Well, I'm glad you combined your answers. And colleagues, please catch me if I do that again. Finally, Ms. Blackburn.
Yes, I believe that keeping intact the communities of interest is important to preserve the historic perspective and relationships of each community whole. I think it's also an opportunity to look to see what else we can include in these communities. Different voices lend sometimes maybe on different thoughts, but you have the same goal in representing your community in terms of bringing in services, bringing in resources. So I look at it also as an opportunity to increase our awareness within our communities of all of the diverse conversations and backgrounds that we come to the table with. I think it's a great opportunity to keep those historic perspectives of communities intact.
Thank you. Thank you all for your willing to serve. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro has a question, and the first respondent will be Ms. Coolidge.
Thank you very much to all of you for stepping up to do this and to be considered. This is such an important exercise. I remember the last time we did this, and I'm sorry if there's noise outside or doing some work, but the last time we went through this exercise, the premise was that there had been quite a bit of growth, especially in the Up County. And so the idea was to figure out how to address this by changing boundaries of other districts. And it was interesting because when I was elected, I was representing a particular part of my district, and then that completely changed. So I had to sort of adjust to that a year and a half into my service. But it was also very interesting in terms of the results. One of the things that was particularly, I thought, important is that this conversation about maintaining community and having, the lines be contiguous to make sure that you were not splitting communities was very much taken into consideration, contrasting that to some of the things that happened with some of the congressional redistricting. So this was really, I think, an interesting model for how very close attention was paid to the best practices around redistricting. So having said that, the result, of course, was that of the 5 councilmanic districts that we have right now, 4 are majority of color. 2 in particular are majority Latino and Black. So 4 is majority Latino, 5 is majority Black. The rest, except for District 1, are a real mix of what you were just describing in terms of who we are in Montgomery County. And so with all of that in consideration, and I had to, add that in terms of Up County representation, Councilmember Sidney Katz also represents the Up County. So there's quite a bit of people there. But taking all of that into consideration, how would you proceed under our legal guidelines to perhaps, given the current configuration, then come up with the additional districts? Given the fact that of the 5, 4 are majority of color, only District 1 is majority white. What will you be looking at? Of course, you'll be looking at the census, but again, that's going to be the interesting challenge is, are you going to literally focus on growth? And if that growth is Up County, is that where you're going to, focus? Or will you take a similar approach that was taken in 2010, which was to see how you would proportionately change the boundary to make it, roughly the same. At this point, it's about 200,000 residents, while figuring out then how to keep these communities of interest intact.
Ms. Coolidge.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like a major challenge. And in fact, now that we're going to have 7 districts instead of 5, that opens up new possibilities. So I think that in the past, the previous census and redistricting exercise, it was mostly a matter, and I am ready to be corrected if I don't know how it happened. But quite often these exercises are a matter of starting with the existing map and making some adjustments to account for growth or whatever else is on people's minds. This time around, with 2 new districts to be created, I think that opens up more degrees of freedom in a way, and would be more encouraging towards taking a fresh eye at the maps. And I would be, looking, yes, you can always start with the census data. Obviously, there are certain communities already pre-existing, Rockville, Silver Spring, and so on, are communities that are well understood. I would imagine, starting with some of the more concentrated districts that are fairly obvious, starting there and then building outward. And then the really tricky questions come at the margins, right? Does this neighborhood belong here or does it belong there? And again, I keep coming back to what I think is going to be very important, which is really making an effort. And I hope that the COVID vaccine is available in time for us to do this, to be out in the communities and inviting citizens and residents to voice their sense of community and where they think they belong, and what are the boundaries of their own neighborhood or community. And so I think that we're going to have to do an awful lot of listening, and it can be a real struggle because there are so many different constraints that we're going to have to deal with equal representation and so on.
Thank you. Ms. Cordier.
Thank you. That is a tough question. So I don't have a quick and easy answer. I think there's a lot to take into consideration and deliberation to be made. Do we redraw everything? Do we, just adjust a couple of districts? Those are questions that I think in the point of the folks that are very data driven, which I'm not so good at that, but I'm glad there are folks on the panel that will be. I think it's the distribution of the population. Where are the centers of more, and then where are there less people, and then figure out who they are, what their communities are, what their issues are, what are the concerns, and then looking at the geography of the neighborhoods and how they're structured and such. So to give you a quick answer, I'll just draw a couple lines here or there or redo the entire map is not something that I feel I could answer. I feel that it's something that needs to definitely be considered. I think that the commitment of the council, with passing the racial equity, that is a factor that I know has been looked at before. We've tried our best, but I think this time around we can always improve and do better. And so my focus would be to approach this in such a way to make it as better as we can, and to take into consideration the needs of the communities. There may be an ability to have Black and Brown communities district redrawn without changing their needs and representation and not having a low impact. And it may have a larger impact up county. I don't know, but I think that is the job of this commission that is being created, to consider all of those factors and figure out how to do this in the best way possible. And the only way that's going to happen is to make sure that we have the community input, however we can manage to do it in this pandemic, to have the stakeholders, leaders, those out in the community, the nonprofits who are providing services, get everybody, to the table and get all the information together. And then, we may have to draw the lines a couple of times, but do it as many times as we need to get it right. And that's, my goal would be to create a kind of toolkit to gather everything before we start building, and then build it out, and have a the transparency portion of this is really important. Have the community involved, have them comment, tell them what they think about what we've come up with, so that they can say that we were transparent, and also to, encourage trust in our council and in our government. I think in this atmosphere, trust in government has suffered. And so this is our opportunity to regain our community's trust.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmad. Mr. Ahmad?
Yes, thank you. I think that, this is a tough question, but actually I think that there have to be several approaches that are taken. A process can be an iterative process. And I think you want to start with the taking the existing districts and seeing how you can adjust them, because that's the easiest approach to take. It's not necessarily going to give you the answer you want, so you've got to do other approaches at the same time and see if they converge on a solution. But certainly you're going to take districts that have grown the fastest, and you're going to ask, can we shrink them by giving off those portions that are least homogeneous with the ones that the interests of the ones that are being preserved, and then can those be merged into those little areas be merged, as long as you follow the restrictions that we've already discussed. You can't violate the racial equality and social justice bill's objectives. You shouldn't divide up existing self-defined communities, and so on. And then, of course, I agree with Ms. Cordier that we really have to have an open, transparent process with a lot of input from the communities. So if you want your objective, hopefully, is to come up with a solution that meets with the consensus of the community, where everybody says, yeah, that's not bad. I'm fairly represented. And if you can't do that, I hope we can, but if you can't do that, then at least get as many people as possible to sign on and say, this is a fair solution.
Thank you, Ms. Blackburn.
Yes, I agree with my co-candidates. This is a very tough question, but I think in answering it, we have to answer it in kind of threefold. I think we need to look at what we have currently, and then the next step would be what has been the historical data on it. And then the third step is to look at projecting what it will be in the next 10 years. And while we look at all three of those components, as everyone has said, it has to be done in transparency. Will this work? And we have to work in unison with the community that this will be impacted, who will be impacted. And I think that once we provide these answers and configurations and look at it and input from both the council members and the community, I think that the process will be one that is transparent and one that is equitable in what the final outcome will be. So I agree that the data is important, the historical perspective, and the ability to keep those communities of interest intact will play a pivotal part in how the new lines will be redrawn.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer.
Yes, you probably hear, so I agree with my fellow candidates, and I'll probably just say one, surprise, surprise, this is a very challenging question. I'll just say three things, again, probably just restating some things that you've already heard. One, I'd keep three things in mind as I would attack this question. One, proportionality is critical. I would definitely keep in mind trying to keep the number of population or people that the council member represent as low as possible to the council member. So I try and keep that proportionality as low as possible. Number two, I try and keep the try and achieve some level of economic prosperity and social economic level together. You know, not all rich people in one area or poor people in one area. Try and balance it out in some way. I keep that in mind. And then the third thing is trying to keep communities intact. So those three elements, as addressing that question, I try and keep those three things in mind.
Terrific. Thank you all for your answers. Council Vice President Albornoz has a question.
Thank you all. I'm very impressed by both your answers, but also the diversity in your professional experiences. When you look at your resumes, I think that's important. I want to shift questioning just a little bit because I'm especially interested in group dynamics. In some ways, this is like an audition for the old show, The Real World, because, you know, it's important to have a group of people that bring those fresh perspectives and unique experiences and professional experiences. If each of you could describe the top two, in your opinion, whether technical experience that you can bring to the table that you think will help contribute to this group, and then also what personal experience do you think that you could bring to this group that you also believe will provide an important perspective as you deliberate. And let's acknowledge there's going to be conflict, there's going to be challenges that you'll have to sort through as a group. So whoever wants to start first, that'd be great.
Well, no, thank you, Council Vice President. It's Ms. Cordier's chance to go first. And I'd remind everybody, if you could keep your answers brief, even to this broad question, so all the council members can get their questions in. Ms. Cordier.
Thank you. Well, I'm an attorney. I have a lot of experience with organizations that I have been on executive boards and participated in that have gone from just doing human rights works to doing getting legislation passed to protect the immigrant community to working in coalitions with other communities. So I bring to the table familiarity with the law, but also familiarity with working with folks who are not lawyers and who are interested in issues that are important to all walks of life in Montgomery County. I've been all over the county based on, my day job in representing clients from up county and down county to everywhere. So I think I bring a sense of having some general knowledge and some specific knowledge, but I'm also pretty well known for being the one to listen to everything and then try to mediate out what are the main points that people are trying to make and get a consensus as to which ones we'll really focus on and perhaps leave the others for another opportunity to come back and revisit them. So those are my skill sets and experience that I have that I would bring in. I look forward to hopefully having the honor to work with everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmad.
Yes. Well, my professional experience is in astrophysics, which may sound far removed from what we're doing here, but at least it does mean that I have a lot of familiarity with numbers and with data and how to process them in an objective way. And one thing I know for sure, 7 is more than 5, and that means being able to preserve the cores of existing districts is going to be easier. There's no reason for any district that is represented in a certain way to lose that representation now. But let me add that I have an avocational experience in voting systems. I've been a civic activist for a long time and also active in a political party, excuse me, and have addressed issues of voting systems. And if I'm allowed to boast, I rewrote a set of bylaws so that a group that had been riven by factionalism while it still has factions, no longer is being destroyed by factionalism. And I think that the lessons I learned there is something that can be brought to the issue of redistricting here. We're not always going to be the same, but we can get along and we can move forward productively as long as everyone is treated fairly and as everyone is given a voice.
Thank you. Ms. Blackburn.
My background is rooted in civil rights and social justice, but I also have a background in government affairs and coalition building. And having worked for the U.S. Census Bureau and the U.S. House of Representatives, that comes with a set of skills, learning how to work across the aisle and on several different issues at any given moment. But I also have a business background of working with the New York Stock Exchange. So I think I come to the table with a collaboration or a culmination of different backgrounds and being able to work through whatever issues that may arise. And I think that's one of my strong points in working together with communities that are not all the same. And I think that is the beauty of it, and that we all have common interests and common goals, and how we get there. It may take us a minute to get there, but I think that we will reach the point of where we all want to be in some conciliatory respect. So I think I can bring that kind of, I don't want to say mediation when things get a little heated, but I do believe that being able to build coalitions across a broad spectrum of interest and representation is something that I have a strong point on.
Great. Mr. Brewer.
Yeah, thank you. I'm a 12-year veteran of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, where I'm currently working as a Assistant Chief Data Officer. So I would bring to this a great deal of background with work on data and analytics that I think would be valuable to the Commission with this. Prior to what I'm currently doing at agriculture, I started off as an agricultural trade negotiator. So did a lot of work with trying to get U.S. ag products into other countries. So have had a lot of experience in trying to get folks to yes. And I think that would be something else that would be very valuable. And I certainly believe that working with my fellow Montgomery County folks would be a lot easier, or at least I believe it would be, than trying to get pork into China or apples into South Korea or something like that. So I think I would bring that kind of negotiating skill to the Commission.
Thank you. Ms. Coolidge.
Yes, I'm an economist by training. I spent most of my career in the World Bank, worked quite a bit with designing and analyzing fairly large-scale surveys, but also working very closely with teams that would be including my own colleagues, who are already a very diverse group within the World Bank, but with counterparts in governments around the world, and most importantly, what we would call our beneficiaries of projects. The counterpart here for you on the council would be your constituents. So fundamentally, listening to the concerns and the priorities of a very diverse group, I think gained a lot of experience listening to people from different cultural backgrounds, often very different from myself, and making sure that we are understanding what are their priorities, what are their concerns, what are their wants and needs, and trying to do the best we can to help serve those wants and needs.
Terrific. Thank you. Okay, last question is the speed round. Councilmember Katz has a question. We need to adjourn soon and take a quick break soon. Colleagues, the next panel is ready to begin early, so we'll try to accommodate that so that we can adjourn for some of your speaking engagement. If the panelists could keep your responses to less than a minute, that would be very helpful. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you, and I will keep to that time frame as well. Thank you all for all of your interest and for all of your great answers. My question really goes to all of Montgomery County. How familiar are you with Montgomery County? How often have you visited or shopped or worked in areas that are outside of your neighborhoods where you live?
First is Mr. Ahmad.
Okay, well, I am fairly familiar with the county. Certainly, as a past president of the Montgomery County Civic Federation, I have worked with groups throughout the county, and I think that since it's a speed round, let me just stop there.
Terrific. Ms. Blackburn.
I am familiar with the county. While I live in down county, I love to explore up county. They have great shopping, the different diverse communities. So that brings me great joy to be discovering all of the diversity that Montgomery County has, how you can go from city or urban to rural in less than 5 minutes. So I think that's the beauty of our county.
Thank you. Mr. Brewer.
Yes, sir. I'm familiar with the county. My wife is a lifelong resident of the county, and my work with agriculture has taken me around to the various orchards and around the county. So I'm familiar with it very well.
Interesting. Thank you. Ms. Coolidge.
Yes, well, I live down in sort of the southeast corner, but yeah, I also really appreciate the opportunities to get around the county, going, up along the Potomac and up to visit like the areas with the agricultural preserve, going up to the county fair, going around some of the work I've done with the Democratic Party. Work over in Burtonsville and trying to reach out to a lot of different potential voters and trying to encourage everyone to participate in the electoral process.
Thank you. And Ms. Cordier.
Thank you. Personally, I have been all over the county for shopping. I am a shopper, so I go up county, Silver Spring, everywhere. For professional reasons, in investigating my clients' cases, I have been, to many places. I live in the Rockville-Potomac border, so it's an easy shoot to Up County, to Silver Spring, Tacoma Park, and to Olney, and I really benefited from Leadership Montgomery, so that gave me a really great opportunity and perspective all around the county, and various positions that I've had with different nonprofit organizations. I've also had the opportunity to visit clinics and shelters and other places that are utilized. So I feel like I have a pretty broad range. I'm sure there are places I haven't been, but not for the lack of trying. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your terrific answers and for your willingness to serve in this very important position. We're really grateful for your time this morning, and we'll be back with you soon, but we're really grateful for your willingness to put yourself out there. Thank you so much. Colleagues, let's take a break till 11:05 and begin the second panel at that time. Thank you. videos on. Thanks for accommodating our schedule and being willing to start early. Okay, we have most council members and it's 11:05. So why don't we begin, please? Good morning, everyone. Thank you for applying for this very important position on the Commission on Redistricting. I will ask you each a series of 4 questions, and then my colleagues may have quick additional questions. We need to adjourn a little faster than the previous panel by a few minutes to accommodate the schedules of some of my colleagues. So we're going to get started. Thank you for accommodating, for moving this up. First of all, panelists, applicants, can you state your names for the record?
Sarah Harris.
Keisha Morris Desir.
Bruce Golden.
Julian Hafner.
James Hedrick.
Bruce, did we get you?
I think I overlapped. Yes, Bruce Goldenson.
Thank you. Terrific. Okay. So There are four standard questions my colleagues may, and I don't need to, since you've seen all these in advance, I don't need to rotate them. I'll begin in alphabetical order. Each of you will answer in sequence. Why do you want to be a member of the Redistricting Commission? Beginning with Ms. Desir.
Hi, thank you first and foremost for inviting me to be a part of this interview process. It is definitely an honor to be here with you all. Thank you. And so to answer the question, first and foremost, I believe that in order to have an inclusive democracy, we have to have fair and accurate redistricting process. And I'm sure, as you all know, gerrymandering has existed almost as long as the union has. And that is because people in power usually want to stay in power. And the Redistricting Commission that is made up of community members is critical in creating a process of inclusiveness and transparency, accountability, of elected officials. And it would just be an honor to be a part of that process to ensure not only the health and wealth of our democracy, but also the residents of Montgomery County. I'll also briefly say that I think that my experience is one that lends itself to this position. Just finishing up serving on Maryland's 2020 Census Complete Count Committee, and also, you know, with my work as Working for Common Cause, I spend a lot of time more recently talking to community members and talking to them about their communities and what they define as their communities as well. So yes, just in general, would love, thank you for being a part of this committee, and thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Goldenson.
Yes. I have a lot of spare time. I have absolutely nothing to do. Leave that and we can end. I really believe that redistricting is a critical thing for any jurisdiction, and certainly for Montgomery County. Obviously, I want to make sure that we have fair representation for all citizens in the county. And the fact that this coincides with the completion of the Census of the United States, it's going to give us a better picture of where our people, how many people there are and where they live and so forth. And it's a perfect year for doing a redistricting. I've seen personally how bad poor redistricting can affect a community and a state. The state legislature has some very interesting congressional districts, the Donut Hole district up in the northeastern Maryland. I don't want to see that kind of thing happen in Montgomery County. And I think it's an appropriate thing to do. I have some background experience in general geography, political science, public activities, and it's just something that I feel like I can add to and help make a better thing for fair representation for all citizens of the county. Plus the fact it's even more interesting this year with the increased number of districts. So it really needed to be done regardless. I'd be delighted to work on this, and the time period is great.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Hafner.
Well, first off, thank you guys for allowing me to appear before you to discuss my qualifications for the appointment to this very important redistricting commission. I just wanted to let you know that I believe that whether we're bound by social, cultural, racial, economic, or even, let's say, geographic concerns, that I think I've cultivated relationships across various sectors of our community. And I believe that's going to provide me with direct insight into the lives and issues of importance to the county's residents. I also believe that our this redistricting effort is going to be the foundation of what I consider to be one of the strongest democracies in the country. And I believe that the work that we have before us is too important to get wrong. I think, as we all know, that there are issues with respect to engaging certain communities. And I believe that redistricting done wrong can kind of exacerbate existing divides and even worse, maybe even create new divides. So what I believe we need to do is adopt an approach that is going to increase inclusion, increase participation, and that eschews, let's say, more disillusionment amongst certain communities, right? Certain communities that don't believe they have ownership of our government. So I'm looking forward to participating in what I believe is going to be an open and transparent process, and also a process that I hope is meaningful, that seeks meaningful, I guess, inclusion or input from the communities that we're seeking to serve. And I guess finally, I'd like to say that I am, through my work in the community over the last several years, I believe I have my finger on the pulse of the community and the demographic changes that are affecting us. And more importantly, I think the political implications that those changes are going to bring. So I am looking forward to kind of bringing the sum total of my experience to bear to this important work. And I think that my perspective is an important one, and one that is going to positively affect the work of the committee.
Terrific. Ms. Harris.
Good morning and congratulations to the newly electeds. I believe this redistricting is really a purposeful opportunity for me to put my background and experience. When I first came to work in the Board of Elections, I came into the county by choice over 50 years ago. But in the mid 80s, my first responsibility was to actually drive and walk every council managed district line and update that legal description, which I did and continued to do, working with park and planning, GIS, geographic information systems in the county, and the census for the 1990, 2000, and 2010 census, and including the precincts through the Board of Elections. So I feel like my background, my experience, and my interest, because I stayed with it, I liked it so much. So those are really the background pieces. I think this is a particularly opportune time as we move from 5 to 7 council managed districts. And it also affects, of course, as we look at the precincts and the congressional, the legislative districts, all those layers are important. And I have had work in those layers as well. I'm nonpartisan in my work and in my perspective. I have served on many boards and in many ways, Leadership Montgomery and others, through the many decades I've lived here in this fine county. And I retired here and I'm planning to stay. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Mr. Hedrick.
Yes, I just want to reiterate my thanks as well and appreciate you letting me come out here this morning. I think that one of the reasons I want to get involved in this is I have a strong background in research and statistics on local elections. I've worked on local elections in my own research in my PhD program at Rice University. I've done a lot of that. I am familiar with a lot of the issues, the research, and the data that goes into drawing district lines, whether it be for council or anything else. So one of the reasons I want to get involved is technical knowledge, background, and expertise, and to help draw the lines. It's critical to have, I think Julian said it and some other people have mentioned it, it's critical for the integrity and for the legitimacy of council races and sort of our local democracy that the lines be drawn fairly and the lines be drawn well, and they include different communities of interest. So I have some technical knowledge that I think I can bring, knowledge of statistics, quantitative ability, and things like that I think can help the process.
Thank you. Okay, question number 2. The commission will meet from February to November. The commission will determine its schedule once it convenes, but in the past, the commission there have been times when the meetings were held on a weekly basis. Will you be able to make the time commitment that the commission requires? Ms. Desir.
Yes, absolutely. I will be able to make any meetings that the commission holds.
Mr. Goldenson.
Yes, I can make the commitment without a problem. But if I may interject something that I should have said before, Mr. Hooker, congratulations on your ascendancy to the presidency of the council. Mr. Katz, thank you so much for your year of service as president of the council. You did a great job, Mr. Hucker. I anticipate you will be doing a great job. I have no problem committing to the February to November period. If it had to run longer, I could do that as well. I do a lot of traveling, and unfortunately in the coming year, because of other conditions, I won't be doing that traveling, so I won't miss any meetings whatsoever.
All right, fair enough. Thank you. Mr. Halfman.
Absolutely. I can be available and will be.
And Ms. Harris.
Yes, I can be available. I do have primary responsibility for my husband who's in assisted living. So if there is some event that I need to manage, that would be, I would address that and work that out, but I am very much available. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Hedrick.
Yes, absolutely. If we do virtual meetings, you may be occasionally treated to one of my children joining us. But other than that, no problem.
You and me both. Okay, number 3. The Racial Equity and Social Justice Bill became effective on March 2nd, 2020, and several months later the Council voted on a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis. What role should the Commission take in addressing racial equity and social justice in boundary decisions? Ms. Kassir.
Yes, thank you for the question. And I absolutely believe that the Commission should take a primary role in addressing racial equity. We all know, as I said in my first answer, the issues of gerrymandering and cracking and packing districts to disenfranchise people of color. More specifically, this is an issue that maybe not has been an issue in Montgomery County, but we do need to make sure that everyone is represented and represented equally. And I definitely think that the Commission should be not only receiving public testimony from constituents, but should also be out in the community and listening to folks that often do not participate in this process as well, and making sure that communities that are close-knit communities stay together in drawing district lines.
Thank you. Mr. Goldenson.
This poses a very interesting question. For what she just said, I will say ditto. We have the opportunity to correct an imbalance in districting that has developed over the years as racial groups have moved into one community or out of another. There should be no district lines based on keeping one group separate from another group. That just should not apply. And by having the power to draw these district lines now, we can make sure that there is a balance district to district. The recent pandemic has pointed out the fact that there is a health crisis, and I understand why the county got into the issue of health being a racial issue in some cases. We're looking at the overall, not just health, but political influence, what people do with their community, how they respond to leadership. And it is critical that we balance our districts appropriately by color, by ethnicity, whatever we can do. There should be no such thing as a black district, a Hispanic district, a white district. That shouldn't be there. We have the power with the proper technical backup from staff and equipment to draw these lines, to do the best we can to balance them out. You don't want to do it too artificially, and we obviously don't want to create odd-shaped districts that are hard to know across the street who's in what district. But we have the power during this next 6 months to balance it out so that every ethnicity finds themselves as part of the general community, not as a separation from anybody else. It really needs to be updated in the county. We haven't been too bad about it in the past. So I don't know that there are huge things to correct, but it needs to clearly be updated because in the 10 years since the last census and redistricting, we've had changes and we can fix that.
Thank you. Mr. Halfman.
So I don't believe in diversity for diversity's sake, and I don't believe the county believes that either. And I believe that's why the racial equity lens legislation was passed. because I believe that reflects our kind of collective belief in the importance of meaningful inclusion, not just diversity, but meaningful inclusion. So I believe that the racial equity lens recognizes that, and what I know implicitly as a Black man in America and as a Howard-trained attorney, that for better or worse, race pervades nearly every aspect of our daily lives, politics in particular. And I think that having that particular understanding of politics and life in general, I believe is important to the work of the commission. And I also believe that to ignore that fact, right, to ignore the importance of race in our daily lives is a particular disservice to communities that are more often than not affected negatively by their lack of inclusion or participation in our civic activities, right? So I see the work of this commission as a natural extension of that belief and recognition of the importance of race. And I also believe that our commission, or this commission, will be well positioned to effectively translate that understanding into a more inclusive politics, right? Which is what I believe that we're all kind of searching for and trying to encourage. So I believe that race plays an important role in what we're doing. And I believe that my position, my experience will importantly affect and positively affect the work of the commission. And I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. Ms. Harris.
Yes, I agree that we need to have the equitable, just distribution of the communities and the population, considering the socioeconomic, the cultural, not only that, but the historical and the new plans in the look-aheads, where we are really undergoing a massive change throughout the county and making the most of that now at this opportunity. So I think it's really important that we give opportunity not only to be heard, but to hear from each of the communities and to educate the communities on how they can participate, be knowledgeable about this redistricting process.
Thank you. And Mr. Hedrick.
Yeah, no, I think the commission should have a major role in addressing racial equity through the drawing of redistrict lines. The council, the county council, is meant to be a representative body, and we, on the commission, should work to make it a representative body for our community. Make sure, make it so that the council is likely to be a representative body, representing the people that are here. One thing that I want to think about too is demographics are changing quickly in the county. When we go through the redistricting process, we need to think not only about what our communities are right now at this point in the time of the census, but also sort of where they're going and what we're going to see in the future. And I think that the commission has a major role to play in addressing racial equity through the county and making sure that we've got a representative council that we need and want.
Thank you. Okay, question number 4. Two-part question. Are you planning to run in the upcoming 2022 election, or are there any other potential conflicts of interest of which we should be aware? Ms. Desir.
No and no.
Terrific. Mr. Goldenson.
I have had my experience with political office, having held several nonpartisan positions, City of Gaithersburg, Board of Education. I made one dabble into partisan politics, got badly stung, and decided that is not for me. I'm going to do public service kinds of things and stay out of the political arena. So that's why I now serve the state of Maryland on their Citizen Involvement Commission and the county and the Board of Appeals and local community activities. There is nothing in my schedule that would interfere with doing the work of this commission. And I have absolutely no desire to run for any office. I will point out, it's almost one way, sorry to say this, I am 1 week older than the incoming president of the United States. My birthday is a week before his. Can't believe that.
Young man.
Right. Thank you for your continued service. Okay, Mr. Hafner.
No and no.
No and no. And Ms. Harris.
No, I'm not planning to run. I am president of the county retirees, and I am on the board of Caring Matters.
Terrific. And Mr. Hedrick?
No, the Hatch Act prohibits me from running for partisan office, and I put my wife through a campaign for city council last year, and I would like to stay married.
Fair enough. Wise man. Okay, those are the 4 standard questions. I'm going to turn to Councilmember Glass, who has a question, and I'll begin to rotate so Mr. Goldenson can have the first answer. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you all for your interest in serving. I know that we're short on time and we all have questions, so I'll just get right to it. But again, thank you all for being here. This November, 63% of Montgomery County voters supported question C on the ballot, which called for the expansion of our council from 9 members to 11 members by adding 2 districts. And it'll be the task of the Redistricting Commission to create these 2 districts in addition to rebalancing the 5 existing districts based on the census data. So I'm curious if you could share with us what the creation of 2 districts means to you and how the will of the voters in the election would guide your work.
Mr. Goldenson?
Oh, I became number 1. Okay.
We're rotating since,
gotcha.
To be fair to everyone. Thank you.
I voted for item C. I appreciated the idea of adding 2 more districts. How to establish where those districts are is going to take some time. I have no preconceived notion about where potential district lines should change to where we put the 2 new districts in. Some of this is going to have to be supported by county staff, some technical analysis of where appropriate lines might go. You know, one can look at the large up-county geographic area and say, well, that's such a big area, we need to cut it in half. That may be one of the places. It may not. I don't know yet. I don't have an honest opinion on that. It is something that is appropriate for the county. I absolutely oppose the other thing about making 11 districts all over the county with no at-large members. It's something that is, I think, appropriate. I'm willing to work on it. But as I said, I have no preconceived notions of where those lines should be. I need to sit down and talk with some of the current council members. You are experienced in where the problems are, and some community members, as well as technical staff, to give me the info.
Mr. Hafner.
Yeah, so I think that question C, even appearing on the ballot, was a natural kind of result of this disaffection that I think folks up county have with respect to their representation on the board. So my initial instinct, particularly given that I'm a resident of the up county, would be to focus on bringing those 2 districts to the up county, right? In response to this concern that there's a lack of representation on the board, given that the at-large members all tend to reside down county. I think that's kind of a natural starting place. But like Mr. Goldenson, I'm not sure that that's where we land, but I do believe that's where we should at least start. If only to reflect, like you said, Mr. Glass, the will of the people.
Ms. Harris.
Yeah, I think we need to look at all the data. I look at the countywide. There are certainly changes in the eastern part, the northern part, the southern part. And really, we are a growing county, and we need to look at the data and look at the population distribution and then make the best guess, considering the incorporated communities and the special taxing areas.
Thank you. Mr. Hedrick.
Yeah, I think the will of the voters, as you said, was obvious that they wanted more representation and more folks on the council, and I think it's good that we've got 2 extra districts that we can use. It's going to make it easier, I think, to have representation and have a county council that looks like our population, it looks like our communities at large. I don't have a predisposed notion of where to put them or where I think that they might need to go. But the population is growing in particular areas. We can see that with the demographics and the data, and I think that that's a pretty important thing to look at when we're trying to figure out how to rebalance and where to put the new districts, is exactly where our county is growing, but it's not growing the same way everywhere. And I think that that's something that we have to look at first when we're talking about what to do with the new districts and how to make sure that they represent, when we draw them up, that they do represent the will of the voters as much as we can figure it out.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
And finally, Ms. Desir.
Yes. So I definitely supported and continue to support Proposition C. I think it was extremely important for the community to be represented fairly. Montgomery County has seen a lot of growth in the last 10 years, and I think it's definitely important to add more voices to the council. How we go about drawing districts as a result of that, I think that we need to be looking at 2020 census data, of course, to see how the community has grown, where the community has grown, and as I mentioned previously, speaking with community members so that we know, exactly where to draw districts, what grocery stores are important to folks, what community centers are important to people, to make sure that those areas are included in the districts, in their districts.
Thank you. Thank you all for your good answers. Councilmember Rice has the next question, and Mr. Hafner will have the first answer. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you all for certainly looking to serve in this role. We really, truly appreciate it. I'm going to jump right in. As one of the four district representatives of the County, both Councilmember Katz, Councilmember Navarro, and Councilmember Friedson, we all represent portions of the County. We've seen a lot of growth. I represent the area of Germantown, where we have over 100,000 residents. Certainly an area that, if incorporated, would be the largest city in Montgomery County. And certainly when we understand Clarksburg and its growth, one of the most rapidly developing areas in the county, certainly there's a lot of concern about equitable growth and equitable representation in those areas. And so mine is kind of a two-parter. One, what is going to guide you when it comes to determining how to make sure that these areas have the representation that they some have espoused they need more of, and how do you tie that in to the census data information that's coming out that shows this continued growth that's happening throughout the county, but primarily in some of these up-county areas. So.
Thank you.
Yes. So I think the first part of your question dealing with how do we ensure that these up-county communities feel that they are included or that they get the representation that they think they deserve. I think one of my colleagues on the panel here mentioned the fact that we should be in the communities having this dialogue with the folks that we purport to represent on this commission. So that would be my first tack would be to ensure that we are communicating with those folks and ensuring that their voices are heard within the work of the commission. Secondly, I believe that the census data. Our charge on this commission is to create these kind of contiguous, compact districts, right? So we're always going to be guided by, I think, first and foremost, by this census data and the demographic information, right? That's always going to inform how we approach creating these districts or looking at these districts. But at the same time, I think with that being our North Star, we should also include some of the things that I mentioned previously in terms of ensuring that there's meaningful input from voices that we don't often hear in these kinds of processes, right? So I think we're guided by those twin concerns, and I don't think one is that they're mutually exclusive, right? I think that they kind of can reinforce each other. But the idea is to understand implicitly that those things are important and not neglect them or diminish them, right? But they act in tandem.
Thank you. Ms. Harris.
Yes, I think, again, looking at the data, looking at the population and the demographics of that population that Park and Planning provides so well in their community data, That's really important. And to let the communities know that the interest from the commission and the county is to keep intact the way they live. And this will be, this redistricting is going to be really essential on how they look at themselves going forward in a new district. There'll be more publicity. There needs to be more education so that the population understands what this means. Often this kind of information flies across beyond the head, and we need to get to the ground and the detail and make sure that people understand and make use of the new district representation, and that it be just and equitable.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. Mr. Hedrick.
Yeah, I think like several of the other folks have said, there's an interesting, small but interesting research lit on this actually in political science, that no matter how you draw the lines, people never think of themselves as, I live in District 3 very much. They think of themselves as residents of Germantown or Rockville or things like that, which is what makes things like compact and contiguous and things like those kind of language that we use. That's how you translate that into it being relevant for the folks that live there. So when we're thinking about where growth has happened, where to put the two new districts in, how to rebalance everything, something to keep in mind is all the data in the world. People still think of themselves as, I live in Germantown and I have a Germantown rep or a Rockville rep or what have you. And that's something to keep in mind, because that gives people much more of a connection to their representative and where they are than drawing fun squiggly lines that make really neat pictures. So I think if that answers your question, I think that's the thing to keep in mind. There's an aspect of place that has to come out of all the data and the shapes.
Thank you. Ms. Desir.
Yeah, I would just pretty much co-sign everything that folks have said so far. I would also add that I think it's important for us to, not only speak to individuals, of course, but we also need to be engaging with community organizations, people that are leaders in the community, to make sure that we're being inclusive of everyone and of all walks of life. So we know traditionally who participates in the process, but I think that we need to do more, and maybe COVID allows us some more opportunity for these meetings to be more accessible to folks. Everyone is on Zoom nowadays. So, having that be open to the community, and partnering with community organizations for them to be able to promote the meetings as well, and to hear from communities, and also give them tools that they're able to understand, to maybe map where they live and what places are important to them as well.
Thank you. And Mr. Goldenson.
One of the ways we might be able to get some input is to use the town hall concept, where we meet, perhaps even using Zoom, with lots of people. Now, you can't meet with lots of citizens, individuals, but we could reach out to all of the existing municipalities. We can reach out to all the major community associations, get their input, Montgomery Villages, the Chamber of Commerce, etc., for their kinds of inputs. The critical thing, I think Mr. Hedrick mentioned something about named areas people associate with living in Germantown or in Olney or whatever. You don't want to cut those communities in half too much. It's something to avoid. We don't cut municipalities in half with district lines whenever possible, and we wouldn't want to cut those communities, so we could take care of that. One of the things that I really feel, and somehow it's going to work into this, one of the complaints of up-county residents has always been that all the at-large people tend to come from the same areas down county. Well, a natural progression is changing that. If the up-county is growing in population the way we've talked about, at some point, the next election, the one after that, the up county will probably wind up with an at-large representative. So that's an aspect that's changing. We need to work that in and make people understand that there's nothing wrong, frankly, with having all of our at-large people from one area. But that's going to change, and that's one of the things that will be corrected. The more input we get, the better it's going to be, and the more groups that feel comfortable with what this commission is coming up with, the better it's going to be when it's done, and you, the council members, get to finally vote on the answer that we've presented in front of you.
Thank you. Okay, the next question goes to Councilmember Navarro, and the first answer will come from Ms. Harris.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you all for stepping up to apply and be considered for this very important commission. I have to say that when I started working on the racial equity and social justice legislation, which was unanimously adopted by my colleagues, one of the things that occurred to me afterwards is that this legislation will also have a major impact in our civic participation here in Montgomery County. And I'm glad that it is definitely centered here in this conversation. Just a little bit of background. When I was elected in a special election in 2009, of course, in 2010, the district's lines were redrawn, and actually my district changed, which was a very interesting experience. At that time, it was because there had been a lot of growth up county, and they had to kind of redistribute the population evenly within the 5 councilmanic districts. And actually, they did a pretty decent job. I mean, it was studied, and it was pretty contiguous. And the end result, which that you have 4 councilmanic districts that are a majority of color, only 1 is not, which is District 1. Now we have this opportunity with 7 districts, and you've talked about this a little bit already. But I'm just curious, given the notion that we are a county that's majority of color, given the notion that representation matters, given the notion that now you have these 2 additional districts, when you start looking at your work, what would be sort of the guiding principles right away? Would it be looking at the growth, or would it be this issue of making sure then that there is, representational distribution vis-a-vis the majority of color population that we have? How would you begin to use those 2 elements to guide your work?
Thank you. I think the important thing is to look at the data and to get the balanced representation at the latter of what you expressed. Really looking at all of that, but appreciating the historical communities and the planned look-aheads for community development and where will those push and pulls occur. But in all of that, the layer has to be a balanced distribution of the different cultural diverse groups. And I'm so proud of this county and Leadership Montgomery of looking at the legislation that you all have passed and the effort that has been made at the corporate level and nonprofit level for diversity.
Thank you. Mr. Hedrick.
Yes, thanks. I think that the guiding principle, I don't think you can disentangle the 2 things of the growth and then racial and ethnic, the distribution within the county and the way the population is distributed, because those 2 things are connected. The growth is in those different communities. And I think that the 2 extra districts offers a good opportunity to to make districts that help the council look like the community that it represents and that it governs. And I think that that has to be a guiding principle in what we do, both, for the legislation that we've talked about, and just because it's something that we need to do to make sure that the county council represents the populations that it's serving and that it both descriptively and substantively represents those populations. So I think we have to have that as a guiding principle, and I think that it's hard to disentangle the 2, since much of that growth is what has caused us to become the diverse community that we are.
Ms. Desir.
Yeah, I would say that it is important to look at both. The growth and racial equity as well. I think that, we can't be in a position where we are obviously diluting votes. We want to comply with the Voting Rights Act and the spirit of the Voting Rights Act. And I think that it is important to look at, historical patterns and also look at, where we think the community is going as well. We don't get everything from census data. We don't get everything from community testimony. We get a lot, but I think it's also important that we talk to developers and folks that are going to be building in communities and folks, and also members of the council as well, to see where they think their community is going as well.
Thank you, Mr. Goldenson.
This is an issue that I'd say I would start with, frankly, an open mind. It's got to be, the conclusion needs to be a balance of not only population numbers, racial distribution, but economic distribution. Three main factors that affect our communities. And, we can all have certain ideas about this, but until a group of us, whether it's the 11 members of the commission or the new commission or whatever, sit down and start to talk and trade a few ideas of how to approach this, I'm not sure what the right answers are. I would hope that 11 members, varying backgrounds, varying of all kinds of things, economic, racial, political, whatever, sit down, toss about a few ideas, and within their first meeting or two, come up with a design, an approach that we're going to take, that we then pass back to the county for the technical support that we need to do it. We don't have the time, experience, money, whatever, to go out and do it on our own. So it's going to be a process. And I don't see how you can define it until the group of us sit down, toss about the ideas, share opinions, and then put down a basic plan, which we can then build and expand upon.
Thank you. And Mr. Halfman.
Yeah, so I appreciate the question, and I would kind of push back against the notion that it's either a growth versus POC kind of approach. I think, as Mr. Hedrick said, that the two are intertwined, implicitly intertwined, and I think that to the extent we're guided by the law in the sense that we have to create these districts that are contiguous and compact, great, that's our North Star, but we should also be informed by, in a really meaningful way, the fact that our county is changing demographically in ways that need to be reflected in this commission, right, in the districts that we are creating. And I think that it does give us, these two new districts do give us a great opportunity to ensure that, in fact, the council continues this evolution that it's currently involved in to truly reflect Montgomery County in all of its splendor, its diverse splendor, right? So I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I think the two work hand in hand, and I think that it's going to take an intentionality, right, to ensure that the two are working together.
Great. Thank you for your great questions, your great answers. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for all of your interest in serving and for all your great answers. You really have had some good insight for all of us to think about. My question really is, how familiar are you with all of Montgomery County? How often have you visited or shopped or worked in areas that are outside of the neighborhoods where you live? Thanks.
Thank you. And it was Mr. Hedrick's turn to go first.
Great. I didn't want to jump in there if I missed that. But up until recently, I was very familiar with lots of parts of Montgomery County. Lately, I've been really familiar with my own neighborhood due to COVID. But I have in-laws up in Damascus. We used to go to Silver Spring all the time. I'd like to think that I'm pretty familiar with all of, or most of Montgomery County, and I travel around the county quite a bit, visiting friends and family and going to the Olney Theater and things like that. So I'd like to think that I'm pretty familiar with most of Montgomery County, or at least I was 9 months ago. It could have changed a lot.
We understand that.
Yeah.
Terrific. Ms. Desir.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that I think that I'm pretty familiar with Montgomery County. I live currently in the down part of the county, but I do tend to hike and do other things in the up county as well. So, I mean, I am mostly familiar with, the Silver Spring, Wheaton, Bethesda, Chevy Chase areas. But I do think, or I am familiar with the up counties as well. I would say that where I am ignorant, I would heavily rely on communities that are familiar with those areas to substitute my knowledge.
Thank you. Mr. Goldenson.
In all the years I've lived in Montgomery County, I have probably traveled to every corner of the county at one point or another. I would agree that I'm not doing a whole lot of that this past year, but do get around on the Beltway. Drove through the Four Corners area the other day, which I hadn't been to in a while. Saw some very distinct changes there from what I remembered. Driven through Olney many times for shopping, the Olney Theater, up county, down county, Silver Spring. I've been to every area of the county at some point, and I have seen the changes. Even in Bethesda, I've seen the changes over the years with new buildings and things going up Wisconsin Avenue. It's not what it was when I campaigned out there 30 years ago. Oh goodness, 30 years ago. Anyway, it's changed, and I've seen a lot of the changes. And I fully appreciate the fact that this is not the county that I first came to. I know my own municipality of Gaithersburg, what it was when I served the city and what it is now. Oh boy, new shopping, new housing, new roads, everything. It's important that we know about the county, and frankly, anybody on the commission who gets on this commission and is not familiar with an area probably should take a half an hour or an hour or two and go out there and visit, see what Olney looks like, see what Burtonsville is looking like right now. Anyway.
Thank you. Mr. Havner.
Yeah, so I'm very familiar with all parts of the county. Living up county requires a certain amount of down county visits, right? Because a lot of the economic development and activity tends to be located down county. But that said, because I'm an up county resident, I'm quite familiar with what happens up county, and in fact have to often encourage folks from the down county to come up and visit us sometime, right? Because from certain people's perspective, up county might as well be Canada. But no, I have extreme or deep experience throughout the county, having worked in downtown Silver Spring, Potomac, Bethesda, having shopped in Bethesda and Silver Spring, and living in up county. I'm quite familiar with the county, but at the same time, there are pockets that I have yet to discover, and I'm actually anticipating discovering them. And I think that being a member of this commission would give us a great opportunity to do so.
Thank you. And Ms. Harris.
Well, as I said in my opening remarks, I traced either by my own car or my own feet all of the councilmanic districts back in the 80s, and over the decades gone to each of the precincts, each of the polling place. And the important piece that I'd like to convey here is by going to those polling places and surveying and talking to the people within each of those schools or churches or whatever, that is a finger on the pulse of the culture within that immediate community. So I really have been in touch with all parts of the county, but again, this year, that's been less so. And I do travel the county, even though I've been retired for a while. I have friends and reasons to go to different parts of the county. I'm quite familiar with all parts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. Thank you all for your great answers. We are very grateful for your willingness to serve on this important commission. We have some very difficult decisions ahead of us because all of you have great experience to offer and have offered us great answers today. We will interview candidates through next week. We plan to make decisions after that, and then we'll notify everyone in January. So thank you so much. If we don't see you before that, have a fantastic holiday.
Thank you
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.